Okay, so for everyone that's joined, thank you very much for joining our webinar today. As you know, the subject of today is how to be a thought leader in the UK IT security market. So just to run you through the order of speakers that we have today, shortly be handing you over to Dianne Canham, who's the MD of our organisation, Éclat Marketing. We also have a lineup of speakers. First off will be Tom Brewster, freelance journalist, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. We also have Adrian Culley, who's a global tech consultant at security company Damballa, who'll be giving you his perspectives on thought leadership. We also will then hand over to Murad, Ahmed, who's technology reporter at The Times. And finally to Will Arnold, who's research director at Apollo Research. And there will be opportunities if you do have any questions that you would like to send us, please do let us know and we'll put those to the panel after all the presentations are finished. So I will hand you over and Dianne Canham will talk you through.
Right, hopefully everybody can hear me. Welcome everybody and thank you very much for joining. I'd like to start just very briefly by introducing our agency, who we are and why we are equipped to talk about thought leadership in the IT security marketplace. So as an agency, Éclat Marketing has 15 years of experience and we focus, security is one of our key competencies. So we have represented many companies and currently have 8 clients in this sector and are regularly dealing with all of the press and analysts in this area. So that's the sales pitch over. Let's get into the meat of the subject. So what is thought leadership? I've used a definition by Forbes, which basically stipulates that a thought leader is an individual or firm that prospects clients, referral sources, intermediaries, and even competitors recognize as one of the foremost authorities in selected areas of specialization, resulting in its being the go-to individual or organization for said expertise. I think that's a fairly comprehensive definition. However, for the purposes of this webinar, we're going to expand that so that we're really not only here talking about the luminaries and one-off individuals. We're looking at how to create an expert profile amongst the IT industry. So before we go any further, you might question why we should aspire to becoming a thought leader. So I wanted to share just some information from Ernst & Young. They actually looked into, or they estimate that from one of their thought leadership campaigns, they managed to generate $4.6 million worth of business leads from a single thought leadership campaign around the subject matter was the University of the Future. But I think that is kind of illustrative of it. This does have tangible benefits. It also, of course, has intangible benefits, and we're going to talk about those in a little bit more detail later on and how we might quantify those. I wanted to question what exactly are we looking for when we're selecting a thought leader. So as marketing managers and directors within tech companies, what qualities, skills do we need in order for them to be convincing experts? Now, there isn't a one-size-fits-all recipe for success here, and some of these, I think, are prerequisites and others are nice to have. So it's great if your spokesperson has charisma and is able to engage and influence and convince others. It's vital that your spokesperson has a depth and breadth of knowledge and understanding of the IT sector so that they can speak very confidently, not just about their own company or your own services and products, but who can provide expert insight and knowledge across a whole breadth of subject areas. They also need to be an original thinker. So being able to push the boundaries a little, I guess, verging on the controversial, so not saying what everybody else is out there in the market is saying, but actually coming up with their own opinion and being willing to share those. And that also has, this is also vital for the organization, not to constrain the speakers too much. They need to be able to express their opinions and challenge the status quo. Being passionate about their subject matter is another advantage, and also being a good communicator and being able to explain, sometimes in relatively simple terms, concepts that may be relatively complex in nature, as well as being able to spot trends before others spot them. So this is what we mean when we're talking about a thought leadership. So moving on then to look at what are the tools of the trade. How do we achieve this elusive position of thought leadership? Well, I think one thing it's worth saying up front here is that it's about creating a dialogue. It's no longer about just broadcasting information. Pushing out press releases is not going to create anyone a thought leadership position. So it's very much about being involved in the industry dialogue and leading that conversation. So these are some of the tools that you can use to establish yourself as a thought leader. So writing a book, for example, becoming an author, is one very good way of achieving that and demonstrating a knowledge and understanding of a certain area of the market. So too are events. So webinars such as these, industry events. We obviously have info security around the corner, RSA, Black Hat, e-crime. There are a lot of events which enable you to present your ideas to your target audience, and establishing a reputation as a much sought after speaker is definitely on the road to establishing yourself as a thought leader. There are also more traditional techniques, so newsletters and blogs are also ways in which we can get our message out there in the marketplace. Social media, of course, plays a vital role in this and enables us not only to broadcast but to interact with our peers, our customers, our prospects, our competitors even. What's also important is having information to back up our viewpoint. So having great research, white papers, having case studies when we're talking about thought leadership as an organization, and of course byline articles. So these are all tools that we can utilize to position ourselves as experts. Moving on then to look at the top tips. What advice can we offer someone that's embarking on the road to establishing their senior executives as thought leaders, or indeed someone who's looking to move their spokespeople from just being a spokesperson to being what we consider a thought leader? First thing I would say is think about yourself as a product or a service. You have to market that product or service. What makes you different? Define your area of specialization. So be the foremost expert in two-factor authentication, ethical hacking, passwords, whatever. But don't try and cover the whole area. Choose your spokesperson wisely. So don't just be swayed by politics. It may not be the CEO or the CTO who's going to be the best spokesperson. Give those spokespeople the opportunity to share their views, and don't constrict and constrain them with too much red tape, should we say. Ensure those spokespeople know the local news agenda. So if your spokesperson is an American or from another country, make sure that they understand and follow the local news. Make sure they also understand that building a relationship with senior reporters and analysts and other influencers is an important criteria, and you should make it a priority and not constantly reschedule. Develop new perspectives goes without saying, and we've also talked about the importance of having great information to back up your viewpoint. But last and not least, don't let personality eclipse your company brand. So it's important that you have probably more than one spokesperson so that the brand doesn't become the individual. So moving on then to look at how can we measure the ROI of thought leadership. Like any other marketing discipline, we need to set clear goals. That may be in the form of how many interviews, how many opinion articles, how many speaking opportunities, but have clearly defined goals for your thought leaders and adhere to them. Invest in high quality material. You may have you may have information that's bound up in your organization that you can abstract and use to illustrate trends. If you do, great. If you have to invest in surveys or research, make sure that it's genuinely interesting and not just selling your product. If you have good quality information, people will trade their contact details to receive that. So it's possible, of course, to get them to input their data into your website in order to obtain that information, which of course enables you to measure things such as downloads, which enables you to measure other social media metrics such as retweets, forum follows, etc. But make sure that you're tracking those lead conversions and seeing how they translate into real sales over time. Plus, of course, in order to measure the ROI, we then need to offset that against the cost of creating the content and, of course, the cost of using your PR agency to give you some sort of measure. But you shouldn't then forget the intangible benefits. So there are huge benefits to being the thought leader in a given sector of the market. And to illustrate this, I found this interesting piece of research by Nielsen, which published yesterday. Which Nielsen are a media measurement organization, and they looked at how influential different types of content was on the purchase process. This was actually on consumers, not a B2B audience, but I'm confident that you would see a similar kind of pattern within a B2B tech audience. So what they actually found was they were measuring branded content, so advertising and the like, user-generated content, so Amazon-type reviews, etc., and expert comments, so recommendation or comment by third-party influential journalists. And the conclusion was overwhelming that the expert content or expert opinion was by far and wide the most influential across the whole purchase process, from developing familiarity and affinity to actually making that purchase. So hopefully that's given you food for thought. I'd now like to hand the control back and invite Tom Brewster, the IT Security Journalist of the Year, 2012 and 2013, to share his views. Thanks, Tom.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dianne. Yeah, I'll try and home in on some of the points that Dianne made, but I guess the overarching theme of what I'm going to be talking about is that if there was ever a time to be a thought leader in the security space, then it's now. I mean, we've had a year of amazing security news. You've got the Snowden leaks, you've got the epic breaches like Target, you've got much better mainstream understanding of what the issues are here in security. And as a writer as well, you know, this is when we should really be exploiting this interest. For me as a journalist, by doing it by, you know, getting as much work as I can, but you know, for you guys to actually, you know, take a stand and say some really interesting stuff. You know, the question is, you know, what stand to take, how to do that, and I guess my first main point is going to be around data, and Dianne touched on that briefly. So the two books you can see up there, they're two of my favorite books that I've read, I think, in the past 2 years, and the reason why has been is purely that they've taken unbelievable amounts of data, just reams and reams of information, and wrapped great narratives around it. Nate Silver, I'm sure you'll all know, is the guy who wrote Signal and Noise, but before that, he's the guy who basically predicted the US election results out of big data. You know, the fact that a big data book is now popular culture book is pretty amazing, and shows where we're at with this kind of stuff. I mean, you might not go as big as Silver or as big as Pinker. You know, these guys are pretty huge thought leaders in their respective fields, but it shows where you can get to, and I'll come back to how big you can go with this stuff now, especially in the security field. I mean, looking at Pinker in particular, he's particularly good at wrapping these narratives around data. His essential argument is that violence has declined over time, and we're now the most peaceable we've ever been, which, you know, most people would think is nonsense. But, you know, he's taken all this data and he's proven it and shown it over a long period of time. And my point here is that in the security industry, I know for a fact that you guys are sitting on a lot of interesting information. I'll give you one example from my past year. It was in December, and I was sat down with a guy from Dell SecureWorks, and he just offhand mentions that they know how many people have been infected with CryptoLocker, and CryptoLocker had been probably the biggest malware story of the year for anyone who was paying attention. And he gives me that little slice of information, and I say, okay, well, can you talk about that to the press? And he's like, yeah, sure. So we go ahead and have this conversation, and you know, 2 weeks later, they're in the register. There's an exclusive. It's got their name in it. It's got their comment in it. They come across as you know, the source of knowledge, and the guys there and the researchers there come across as thought leaders. I mean, it's occasionally it's that simple. It's looking at the data that you're sitting on, wrapping the narrative around it, and then going out with it. Dianne mentioned, you know, how you can do this and potentially go and get surveys, but to be honest, most of the surveys we see as journalists are pretty bland stuff. You know, we're bored of, you know, how much does a breach cost, how many employees use their own devices. You know, we're tired of that. We know that you guys are sitting on information, and all it takes is just to, you know, dig deep and find it. I saw a great quote today, which goes like this. It was one that I'd completely forgotten about, but it was, if you torture data sufficiently, it will confess to almost anything. And I think that's kind of perfectly sums this up. You know the data's there, you just need to exploit it. Cool, if we can move on to the next slide. So yeah, this is all about finding the right medium. There are a lot of choices. Dianne touched on quite a few of them. I'll give my opinion on which one I think is actually the best way to go from a security perspective. I mean, you've got social networks. Yep, they're good, but for me, they're just advertising platforms. Company blogs can also be useful. We've seen a lot of these in the security world, and they're usually a good platform to share unique research with, or to talk about current trends, but they're not really creating personalities. They're not creating individual thought leaders. One of the most effective ones I have seen, which was essentially a completely separate site, was Naked Security, and that's obviously still going. And that's where Graham Culley made his name, and it's still a great site, still a really good place to pick up information on the latest threats. But again, you know, now Graham Culley's gone. It's, you know, I personally think it's lost a bit of that personality. And now Graham, and this is my point here, Graham has gone to create his own website. And this is, I think, the perfect way to do it. You take the personality and you build web apps, you build content essentially around them and their knowledge. And the example that I've got, the picture on the guy on the bottom right there, I'm sure you'll all know, or hopefully you know that face. You should do if you're in the security industry. It's Brian Krebs, and he's not part of a vendor, but he's sitting on pretty much the same information that a lot of vendors are. A lot of vendors are going around the underground forums. They're collecting, things like stolen logins. He's just able to spend the time and wrap the stories around it, and I personally believe that the security companies can do the same and on a greater magnitude. It's just we don't really see enough of it. As a journalist, I would be jumping on anything like that, especially if it's coming from trusted security vendors. So yeah, in my opinion, I think the way to go, and I know I'm probably slightly contradicting Dianne here in the fact that she said don't let personality overtake the company, but I think you really do need to create personalities. You need to pick 2 or 3 people who are really going to be your thought leaders, and then really big them up, for want of a better phrase. I guess my final point here would be on frequency. You need to decide how much you're going to post, how much you're going to be in appearance, because I think overkill is a big problem. You want to be present, but you don't want to be overly present, if you see what I mean. If you're making big comments about security every single day, people are just going to assume that you're saying things for the sake of it, just because you want to be a thought leader without actually doing what doing the right thing to become a thought leader. You don't want to become a cliche. You don't want to tire people out. Pick your moments so that when you do say something, people actually listen. Go on to the next slide. Thanks. Yeah, this is just a really kind of basic point, and I'll get through this very quickly. There's no need to sell products directly through whatever thought leadership program you're doing. Journalists and general readers, they'll see through it, and it becomes this sort of surreptitious, not very nice experience when you realize, someone's making a great point, and then at the end of it you realize the only reason they're doing it is to sell a product, rather than either be helpful or do something altruistically. We want to believe that you're doing something not because it's backed by commercial interest. And and maybe this is slightly cynical to say as a journalist, but just don't be obvious about it. There's no need. At the end of the day, all you need to do here is have respect for your audience. I think that's what it comes down to. They will know that you work for a company. They'll figure it out. Give them the respect, and then you'll get respect back. And then hopefully that will filter, well, it almost certainly will filter down to the brand, and we've seen that a lot, and I'll come back to that again later. We can move on to the next slide. So yeah, this is the final slide, and I mean I've worked across trade and national, but I'll talk about it from a trade perspective because I know that Murad has a much better experience than I do on that. But a lot of things kind of remain the same. We want interviewees who can talk a lot but aren't overly annoying. We want people who say original things, and we essentially want people who can say things that will make news or make a news headline. So you can frame things in a really succinct but surprising way, I guess is the key thing here. But in terms of differences with trade you really have to think about the audience of the journalist that you're speaking to here. So I'll give you an example. I guess with the security example, we'll say a 0-day vulnerability hits. We don't want to know what's, we don't solely want to know what's vulnerable and who's being attacked. We want to know whether the vendor has responded responsibly. Do IT guys have enough help there? We want to know how this relates to the wider threat landscape. For instance, how might the vulnerability be changed to another vulnerability to carry out an exploit? Are there things that IT guys or CEOs even, or CISOs, or whoever it is that's the audience, they need the extra detail. So yeah, in terms of good examples from what I've been talking about as a whole, I'm sure you'll know the guy in the bottom left, Bruce Schneier, looking particularly cool there. I mean, he's not the easiest man to talk to, but when he talks, he gives you quotes that make stories. I mean, just type his name into Google News right now, and you'll see reams of content. And this guy, remember that this guy had been at BT for years and years. He's now at a new company called CO3. And you know, he doesn't sell. He just talks on topics because he built his career. You know, he was a respected cryptographer. He wrote books. Was a very niche subject at the time, and now he knows that because he's so knowledgeable on that, he can talk about it to the general public, he can talk about it to security specialists, he can talk about it with anyone, and then he can talk about wider security issues at the same time. I mean, he's a great public speaker. He's not the most open guy on the internet. He doesn't write a huge amount. He's got his own website though, so that kind of relates back to what I was saying about the ideal platform. And the guy in the middle, that's Josh Corman. He's a bit quieter, but the reason why I really like him, and this goes for I guess the other two as well, is that he's very approachable. I can get him on Skype. We won't have to go through, sorry Dianne, and sorry all the PRs listening, but he won't, you know, take us through the PR rigmarole of you know, getting permission just to say something. You know, it's very frustrating as a journalist when you just want some comment, and it's not particularly controversial comment, but it's very good comment, it's very insightful comment, and there's no reason for a PR to look at it. But a lot of people will still kind of go through the process just being terrified of journalists, and I admit that some of us are pretty terrifying sometimes, but it shouldn't be that much of a horrific experience to come to us and talk about what you know about. The other cool thing that Josh does is he essentially does loads of extracurricular stuff, and these are the kind of guys we like, the guys who do more than just their day job. I mean, he's recently set up something called We Are the Cavalry. I would very much recommend you all go and look at it. It focuses on vulnerability research for public safety, so we're talking about people hacking homes and setting things on fire. We're talking about people hacking into heart monitors and things like that, and this guy, he's doing it as a non-profit. He's doing it completely off his own back just because he's worried about it and he's knowledgeable about it and he knows that he can make a difference, and that's why I really like Josh. On the bottom right, on the very bottom right, is James Lyon. He's the best presenter I've seen in the security industry. If you get a chance to see someone presenting and you want an example of someone who's likable, funny, very eloquent, James Lyon's your man, hence why he in that picture is actually sat next to Snoop Dogg, and then to the left of Snoop Dogg is Bill Maher. So he's on a US talk show. This is a guy from Sophos. He's in his 20s still. He hasn't been around for that long, but in that short amount of time, just by being incredibly approachable and likable, he's on an HBO talk show. And he's a security expert, which I think, you know, goes to show how high you can aim here. And I guess that's my takeaway from all this, and this is my final comment, that the higher you aim and the likelier it is that you'll be respected, and learn from these guys, and it should be not too difficult in this environment to become a very good, very helpful thought leader. Thanks.
Right, so we're handing you over now to Adrian Culley. Adrian?
Okay, so Adrian Culley here. I'm a brief summary of my background. Pretty much got a blue chip security CV. In the last 12 months we've been very active and had a lot of successes. I'll talk about a couple of examples in a little while in a lot more detail, but I know it's a cliche, but success does lead to success, and if you make good decisions, you get things right at an early stage, you will find yourself more and more in demand, and I'll try and share over the next couple of slides some of the experience as to how we've achieved that. If we can go to the next slide, please, Dan, or whoever's in charge. Okay, so I can't do this without giving you a broad philosophy. Some of you may be familiar with, you may not be familiar with, there's a well-worn Chinese proverb, when's the best time to plant a tree? And there's two answers. The first answer is 20 years ago. Of course, if you didn't do it 20 years ago, when's the next best time? And that's now. And what I'm talking about here in terms of thought leadership is your own provenance, skills, experience and background. It's great if you've got things that you've been involved in for a long time that really add to your, why should people listen to what you've got to say, why are you relevant and valid. However, if that follows on from Tom's example of James Long, who is an excellent speaker, I know James personally, there's nothing to stop anybody starting. Everybody's got to start somewhere. I do get annoyed myself being a little bit longer in the tooth when I come across over the years people trying to tell younger people that they can't do it and it's just not for them yet, and so on and so forth. And that's a load of nonsense as well. So I think both aspects of this Chinese proverb are valid. And it's a doing thing, which takes on the next slide. So, recapping in a little way what Dianne started off with and what Tom's just covered. Know your stuff, never stop learning. Question and challenge things, particularly if you're representing a company. Just because you've been given their latest academic paper, their latest white paper, make sure you read it, make sure you challenge the author. Ask, I do all the time. The reason for this is, well, the clue's in the name. Thought leadership implies thinking. And people don't always do that. You'll notice in this I don't have don'ts, but I will give them verbally. Don't be a talking sales brochure. People can read for themselves. You do need to have that depth of knowledge to be able to go off-piste, handle questions, and most importantly, be answering, in an interview with a journalist, both one eye on who's the audience for the final piece that the journalist is wanting to deliver to, but also the journalists themselves answering their question. Are you on topic, on subject? Doesn't mean you can't disagree with them or introduce new information they don't know, but what they don't want to know, as Tom alluded to in his talk, is they don't want to know what your latest colours of widget that your company produces are. You're not going to achieve thought leadership in that way. Secondly, the psychology of getting it right. Why do we want to achieve thought leadership? This is quite powerful. We all are programmed that when we learn information for the first time and it is useful to us, it resonates in some way, we will both remember who told us, but we will also enjoy, because there's a good chance if we've just learned it for the first time, a lot of our friends and colleagues won't know this and we can educate them for the first time. And that's a sort of ripple effect. And people, when you get it right, people remember that you're the person that they learned from. You're the person that explained it. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to be constantly, Thomas Edison reinventing the world, inventing things yourself. Sometimes that's helpful, but it can also be analytical comment on occurring events, on what's in the news today. We had some success about 6-8 weeks ago. There was a report came out from the Bank of England regarding a banking security exercise at the same time as a senior government minister made some comments that were completely opposite. We picked up on this collectively, myself and éclat, and we were able to serve it up to a number of journalists as, look, there's a straightforward conflict here. And that was from both knowing what we're talking about and following contemporaneous events. Advice I give to other people is also be confident to say no. I was contacted via email start of last week, just over a week ago, asking to comment on the missing Malaysian plane being hacked, and I straightforward refused to do it. It was complete speculation. There's no evidence whatsoever to suggest it was a hack-in. I wasn't prepared to do that, and I said no. Those of you who know me well will know I'm a strong enough character to do that. However, it is about building relationships as well, both with the journalist and the audience. All business people do business with people, and certainly from my perspective, I'm always looking to not just give a one-off quote. If I get this personally, if I get a sniffer journalist is after rent a quote, they're not likely to get anything. I want to build a relationship with the journalist. I want the journalist to build a relationship with me. But most important is the bottom point on this slide, which is responsiveness is key. One of the most surreal days of my life in the last 12 months was end of June last year. I ended up on Newsnight that evening talking about the Huawei issue regarding China having access to British telecoms security systems or not. We got the approach from the BBC round about just after midday. We had to respond within half an hour. I was 300 miles away at the time, and literally within 2 hours of an initial approach, I was on a train to London, and within 8 hours of the original approach, I was in the BBC studio waiting to go on the programme. There was a academic expert. I did some background research. The first thing is, some of you may not be familiar with the name Huawei. You may have seen it or pronounced it as Huawei, which is how it looks to a British or English-speaking person. It's not how it's pronounced at all. In fact, even the BBC's translation and pronunciation department had got it wrong. Through a little bit of research in the 8 hours that we had, we got it right. And that gave us a lot of credence and provenance as well, that we were actually even knew the name of the company that was involved, never mind the background underlying issues. But we got that opportunity through being flexible and responsive, and you know, it's part of why I want to build relationships with journalists. I want to, you know, I'm very much aware that on occasion you're very tight against it in terms of deadlines and copy submission. It's not so common these days that you'll have an exclusive article that's been commissioned. Sometimes it's first past the post. So we try collectively as best as we can to, where things are tight for you, to get you a quote that's helpful, some comment that's helpful in a tight time frame. Think about the language that you're using. Again, it's teach anyone to suck eggs. The journalists here, I'm sure you're all familiar with them. George Orwell's rules on the English language, but try not to use cliches. If you're using an analogy, try and make sure it's actually relevant and it actually extends and follows through. I have bugbears with American colleagues all the time who get hooked up on buzzwords. The latest one is ecosystem. I had a meeting just a couple of months ago where I said to a CEO who was busy peppering me with ecosystems, excuse me, 2 of those ecosystems you've just mentioned, surely they're actually microclimates of the first ecosystem. That was far too much thinking for him, and he just stopped dead in his tracks. If you're going to use analogies, they're very powerful. They do resonate with people, and they're an effective part of being a thought leader, but they must stand up. They can't just be meaningless throwaway buzzwords. But when you get it right, they're very, very helpful. Do trust your PR team and the journalist. It's nice if you can get oversight of the copy before it goes out, if there isn't such time constraints. However, when you back to building the relationship, when you've developed that trust, certainly I find I'm much more comfortable that it's not so essential that I have any final sight. Tom touched on social media. There's a couple of things I want to say about that. It is important. The reason we're all doing what we're doing today, all doing what we're doing day to day, is society is now digital, the economy is digital. It's why I feel you'll hear much less about cybercrime. So already the prefix E is dropping away. And it's because most crime has a digital element now. Most crime involves cybercrime to some extent. Because of that, most media is connected into the social media as well. This permeates the whole of society. Do know the differences between Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, what's appropriate, what's not. I see people all the time making posts on LinkedIn which basically say, our widgets are now available in blue. That's not the way to achieve thought leadership. You must be sharing ideas and information with people that's useful to them, whether it's connecting ideas, whether it's negating ideas, back to being confident to say no, saying something's not correct. More than happy to do as well. It all helps people. What they don't want to hear is what your latest marketing brochure says. The other thing to consider about social media is what the target audience, much more so than earlier when you did a piece for a journalist, but what the target audience are actually doing at the moment that you make your post. And not everybody's got to this level of subtlety and sophistication with target social media yet. The 2 biggest English-speaking groups using Twitter, for example, are London and New York in terms of commuting groups. And I personally found it very, very useful making Twitter posts if I time them to between 7:30 and 8:30 on a morning for London, and between 7:30 and 8:30 on a morning for New York. You have a massive demographic that's using public transport, and it doesn't guarantee, but it greatly increases your chances of trending. So there are many subtleties to effectively using social media, but done right, it can be very, very powerful. And then lastly, what we're doing here, again, less is more, keep it simple. It's all about talking to people. which is another way of saying build a relationship. You need to be able to do that. That's me wrapped up.
Lovely. Thank you very much for sharing your perspective, Adrian. Very interesting insight by the spokesperson. We're now going to hand over to Murad Ahmed. So Murad's going to give his perspective on what it takes to be a thought leader, obviously from a national title. So Murad, we'll hand over to you.
So my name is Murad Ahmed. I'm the technology reporter for the Times. You know, we've been covering a lot of cybercrime and IT security stories increasingly over the last few years, particularly in the 5 years that I've been covering the subject for the Times. If we can go to the first slide. I thought to start with, let's go with the kind of the idea behind this webinar. What is thought leadership? I really want to ask, you know, actually, what is thought leadership? Because I'm confused by the term. It's not a term that I hear regularly, and it's actually, to be frank, for a lot of national newspaper journalists, it's not a term that's going to play well with them. We are going to be deeply cynical about this term. I understand what it means, and everyone's been discussing it very clearly, but I would not go about suggesting that you go and tell national newspaper journalists that you're thought leaders. Can we go to the second slide? What I would say is, what national newspaper journalists, people people like me who are covering this subject in a reasonable amount of depth, but not every day, as one of many subjects in this sphere, what we're looking for is people who can explain a really difficult subject in simple terms, because that is what our audience wants. The Times' audience is it's quite widespread. It's very knowledgeable, but it won't know even basic terms in security language very well. For example, if we're going to write about a botnet, I will spend a couple of lines explaining what a botnet is. In reality, what I really want is somebody else to explain that in simple terms, in a way that people can relate to and understand. So you have to remember that even though you guys are the experts, you have a wealth of knowledge, you need to be able to put that down into everyday language that we can understand. And your sources for great amount of knowledge and data, but you have to remember that you're talking not necessarily to me, who will understand everything that you're saying, but to a much wider audience. And never forget that. If we can go to the third slide. What I think this, forgive me if I'm wrong, but what I think this this session is all about is how do you get into the media? Otherwise, why would you be speaking to me? But in my case, how do you get into the mainstream press? So I thought I'd give an example. Here's a front page story from a few months ago. I'm sure many of you are aware of it. It's the Laurie Love case. I won't speak too much about the case because it's kind of an ongoing legal case. But there was this British young guy who is being accused of by the American government of hacking into various governmental sites and databases. That story broke very late in the day from memory. It was early morning New York time, so that's about 3-4 o'clock UK time, and it's a lot of complicated information that's in the kind of it's in the document that the FBI released explaining the allegations and so on, and there's multiple things going on at this one time. It's too small to see, but there's 3 different people that are on this story. There's me, the technology reporter, who has to cover all the kind of technical elements of the story. There's a New York correspondent who's covering, who's getting information from the FBI. There's the political correspondent who is covering various governmental sides to the story from the UK. And as a result of this, we're all running around trying to get various different bits of information. And what I need to know is what is the significance of this guy and what he's been accused of doing. And I'm not going to go to, I think Tom and others have brought this out, I'm not going to go to a PR team at this point. I'm going to go to people that I know and can rely on to be able to explain everything that's happened in very, very quickly, especially if I'm able to send them the documents and do that. So I contacted a guy called Rick Ferguson, who's at Trend Micro. He's one of my go-to people who will explain this in very simple terms. He explained the seriousness and the gravity of the case and where it relates in other similar cases right down back in history, because he's able to do that, and he was able to explain it in very simple terms. And he's the guy that gets on the front page story in the Times when we decide that we're going to splash on this. And the reason why is that 2 or 3 years ago we had a drink. He's very easy to get on with and understand and talk with, but I also have his mobile number, and he's taken my phone call various different places around the world. He sometimes works in Poland. He's all around the world giving conferences. He will always answer my call. Not only that, he will always respond. Even if it's to say he's on holiday, he will make that response. And at that moment in time, I really needed a response very, very quickly, and he was there, and he was reliable. So if we go to the next slide, a lot of this is to do with being accessible. And I wanted to give some examples of being accessible. Actually, Tom in particular went through, how you can be accessible to journalists. But if you look at Sophos's press contacts page, they don't actually have these are all press contacts. You've got phone numbers and email addresses, and they used to have contacts directly to their security analysts, like Graham Culley, who's now left the organisation. But you would be able to, they had his mobile number on the website, so they trusted their analysts and people, their experts, to be able to talk about the subject. And not worry about having to be a layer in between. I think you have to empower the experts that are in the organisations to be able to speak and not worry too much about what they're saying. I think that Adrian mentioned, being able to get kind of copy approval. I can tell you now from the Times' perspective is that we would never ever give copy approval to any quotes or anything like that. It's just not how we operate, and I know that a lot of other newspapers are like that. So you have to be willing to let go a little bit. What you should aim to do is try and get us in front of these people, and then let us build our own relationship separate to that, and that can grow organically. Sophos is a great example of that. Another guy is a guy called Mikko Hipponen, who I'm sure a lot of you know. He works for F-Secure, but if you typed in his name into Google, his what would come up is a page with his phone number, his Finnish mobile phone number, and he will also respond to all calls, and he also explains difficult things in very simple terms, and he's always accessible. And another guy is also James Line, who two people have already mentioned, and I'll be able to explain what he's able to do in the next slide, the 5th slide. So this help that you can provide, this kind of access to expertise, can go a long way. James actually, I got in contact with Sophos wanting someone to help me with a story about the dark web. Now, what you'll find a lot of the time, especially in the mainstream press, is that we're way behind the trade press in level of expertise and knowledge. Dark web stories have been around for years, but the Times has not covered this subject in any great detail for a very long time, and this was our first entry into it. This was, I think, a couple of years ago, and what we needed was somebody to be able to download Tor, go into the dark web. At the time that the Silk Road website was still up and running, go into Silk Road, find find examples of drugs and guns and things like that. There's nobody here who was comfortable doing that. We have IT experts who've been able to do it, but we didn't want to download it onto our systems, and we wanted somebody who could also talk about what they were doing at all times. James went out of his way to help us. So first of all, I called him up. He said, "Okay, I'll go and do it." He found Silk Road and a number of other marketplaces. He came down to London. He sat in our coffee shop. He listened to every kind of very basic instruction that I needed to do, and then he was steadily talking me through it. This was at the time a completely new world to me, and his pictures in that story, he's quoted throughout it. He became, our go-to person to talk about this particular topic, and it's all because, he spent a little bit of his time and effort, which was easy for him. It was really basic stuff for him to go out of his way to help us, and that we ended up with this double-page spread, which in ×2, a news story on the back of that. When Silk Road became defunct, that became a big story. Later on, we had a front-page story based on dark web about the other online marketplaces that had popped up, and that's because we'd been able to educate our audience about the subject. So this wasn't new, this wasn't weird, and also you're not just educating our audience, you're educating the editors of this newspaper. Usually they're kind of graying older blokes who still technology is a new subject for them. So you have to ease them through as well as the audience, because they are reflective of the audience in many ways. So that's what I wanted to get through to you. A few things are, making your presence felt, being able to be accessed pretty much at times that journalists want to be able to access them, and being approachable, being able to talk about this in everyday language. And you will see that it's not immediately apparent how these relationships result in stories or a bigger profile, but slowly but surely these guys all end up getting much bigger profiles. Both James and Mikko have done TED Talks, and I'm pretty sure, and they've gone on to bigger, better things. Rick, I've seen, is just all over the national newspapers as a result of being accessible in this way. So if you want to get into the mainstream press, you want to be a prominent figure, those are the things you need to do.
Okay, so we're going to hand over to Will Arnold, who's Research Director at Culley Research, who can talk about some of the trends and hot topics.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Kirsten. Yeah, I'm going to take you very, very briefly through the media landscape in which companies are building their thought leadership positions. It will be very brief because I'm conscious of the time marching on, and also quite a lot of what I've put together will just reinforce what the speakers have been saying so far. I mean, just the only thing really to kind of emphasize on this first slide, which the science will show where the findings that I'm about to show you come from, is that we researched the whole technology industry, and a key part of that is the security industry, or media coverage of the security industry that we look at across quite a lot of the world. If you'd like to move on to the next slide. Just wanted to sketch in what or the position of security within the media is. As Tom said earlier, it has been a pretty amazing year for security news, and actually media coverage of security, which was already pretty high, was actually up almost 19% over the last 12 months. And when we look at the kind of hottest tech subjects, security provides 5 of those up. interestingly, in the context of what Murad's just been saying, non-tech media actually upped their volume by just over 26%. So the non-tech specialist media are putting their or increasing the amount of attention they pay to security. Then over on the right, I've broken security down into a number of different types of security to show which ones are being covered the most. The most interesting thing to draw out of that is that security as a generic subject, rather than talking about specific types of security or security threat, security as a generic subject has come back on top of the list. It's been kind of falling over the last few years. It's back at the top, and that seems to suggest that the media and the climate is looking much more into just looking at security as a general issue, as well as specific issues. I think it shows that security is just kind of looming larger in people's thinking. So if we move on to the next slide, I'm not going to sort of talk too much about this. People kind of sort of pondered, I think that's the right word, the question of what thought leadership means, if it means anything. I kind of looked at which ones were perceived to be the companies or the people that the media would regularly go to find out about subjects, particularly new subjects, and looked at ones that were perceived by other influencers by influencers generally as being leaders, and these were the top 10. And then when I looked at what characterized thought leaders, these were the sorts of features that came out most often. And as you can see, I mean, a lot of these have already been talked about before. It's, the thought leaders tend to be talking about new things. They tend to take a fresh perspective on things. They talk about things relevantly or in a way that will be relevant to their audience. They also will appear in a whole range of different types of story as they spread their word. So if we just move on to the next slide, kind of because one of the aspects of security is that it kind of crosses across several or a lot of different types of technology. In a sense, it's become a horizontal subject within security, and it's become clear that a lot of the hot topics that the media that kind of flare up on the media's agenda have got security angles, and people have already been talking about some of those today. But things like Bitcoin, where people began a little while ago to talk about the potential threats to Bitcoin as a currency. We've moved on in more recent months to a stream or torrent of stories on the attacks that have been mounted on Bitcoin. I think that this slide is designed to show with the top 10 or the hottest topics over the last 6 months within the technology sector, which ones are likely to resonate most with the media. And so most of them, you can see what the security angle might be. Okay, if we move on to the next one. Also, just wanted to kind of mention a couple of other aspects. I mean, again, Murad and Tom have already spoken themselves about the way that say national newspapers will differ from trade or technology titles in the way that they approach security. But also just wanted to emphasize that it's very important to understand where a topic has reached in its cycle. There's a fairly clear cycle that I've outlined in the graphic of the way that the media tend to talk about a subject. Tom mentioned that journalists are all too often bored by the same old stories, and we often get calls from agencies or from companies saying that their survey has kind of bombed, despite the amount of money that they might have spent on it, and pretty often it's because they've misjudged where a particular topic is on its cycle. And the obvious example, if they're talking about the benefits of a piece of technology, but the media have kind of moved on from that, and they're looking at the potential problems of that technology. They're kind of out of step with where the agenda or where the subject has reached on the agenda. So timing and understanding what the kind of the zeitgeist of surrounding a particular subject is very, very important for A, maximizing coverage, and B, looking or positioning yourself at as being at the kind of cutting edge of the subject. So on to the next one, which is the last one. I also kind of just wanted to pick out a couple of aspects of to do with influencers. Now, what we have done is to go through to look at several hundred security managers, or CSOs, and so on, and looked at which influencers they choose to get their information from, choose to get or choose to follow their opinions, choose to follow. And what that kind of shows is, looking at the left-hand chart, is that technology journalists, and I've indexed the level of reach of security managers on technology journalists at 100. You can see that technology journalists are a kind of prime channel to reach people. But you can also see, which has been a slight surprise, and in some ways security is atypical of sectors generally within technology, and that is that technology companies and executives at vendors have a very high pickup or high level of influence amongst security managers. And then you can see that they also look at other security professionals, analysts, bloggers, general news feeds, and so on. So it gives you an idea of the types of channel through which to reach the audience, and which ones will have the most impact. Then looked at specific types of influencer, and did this for two reasons. One because they're examples of thought leaders, and one or two of them have already been mentioned, and/or they're ways to help build a thought leadership position. And you can see there's a kind of whole range of different types of people who security managers are following or have chosen to follow to get their information from. So that was a very kind of brief overview of the of some of the aspects of the landscape in which companies are operating, trying to manage their thought leadership programs. And I will leave it there and hand back to Kirsten.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Will. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much to all our speakers. Some really interesting insights here. We do have some questions. I'm conscious we're a little bit over time, so what we'll do, we'll post those on our blog and we'll post the answers there so you can have a look on our website and they will be available, as will the presentation. We'll make sure that's available as well for anyone that missed either the beginning or the last part of it. If you do have any questions, then please do contact us. We've got our contact details there. And our next webinar, we'll flag that up on our website. That's going to be on May the 21st. It's going to be about launching a US company in Europe. So again, we'll make all those details available. So thank you once again to all our speakers, and thank you to everyone that joined. And any questions, do let us know.